QM, everybody. Welcome back to another one of our broadcasts. Normally these are weekly, but obviously there's been a lot going on, and so I'm going to catch you up with that. As always, a quick disclaimer. This broadcast does not construe an investment. It is not, solicitation for investment. Does not constitute financial advice. The Quill and Wrapped Quill tokens are utility tokens of the network, and we do not encourage or suggest speculating on the network's utility token. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to have to move a whole bunch of stuff out of the way. Streamlabs really messed up. Sorry for the delay on this. Yeah, a little bit. Sorry about that. Doing the best I can. Anyway, so I'm going to have to move some stuff out of the way because, like I said, Streamlabs is all screwed up right now. I couldn't even do a co-stream to Twitch, so we're just doing it on Twitter today, apparently. Let's get this up. Cool. All right. So today we're going to be talking about where things have been, where we're going, and some details for the more like engineering side focus as well. But we'll go ahead and start with the big items. We're going to talk about, of course, as always, our mission, which is to secure every bit of traffic on the internet, whether Q-native, other decentralized protocols, or the broader web itself, and the ways in which we do this. Now, normally I jump right into the agenda and stuff, but one of the things that has stood out to me over really the past year of talking to people who are not necessarily like deep in the weeds of crypto necessarily, or even deep in the weeds of like writing software, they're just like, they know about what I'm building, but they don't know what it is. And so I wanted to talk real quick about like the ways in which we do things to fulfill this mission. And so this can help kind of elaborate what Quilibrium is with all of those different ways in which we do things. And so Quilibrium, of course, is a protocol. And like all protocols, it's got a set of rules. That's how a protocol works. And we are specifically a decentralized protocol. And the purpose of that protocol is to fulfill the mission of securing every bit of traffic on the internet. But this comes out in a couple of different ways. So the first and foremost is the protocol itself, providing native secure applications and development tools. You can already see a really powerful example of a native secure application in the form of Quorum and Quorum Mobile, and we'll get into that later in this talk today. But also development tools like being able to deploy applications to the network, deploy new tokens to the network that are privacy preserving, and have file hosting on the network as well. The second way in which we do this is to basically meet developers where they are. And in doing this, we provide API compatible tooling that makes it possible for them to lift and shift what they're building onto the network without even actually having to understand how the network works. And that's a very powerful thing to do. It's one of the like more common techniques that really bootstrapped Cloudflare and turned them into the empire that they are. They started out just being DDoS protection, but then they started to roll out compatible services. Like R2 is a compatible service to AWS's S3. And so we're doing the same thing. QStorage is our S3 compatible offering. We have a KMS compatible offering for Amazon that uses our MPC technology to provide essentially trustless, decentralized key management. And then the last way in which we do this is that we enhance and improve the privacy of other protocols. If you've been in the space long enough, you already know that if you're transacting on Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, by default at the very least, but by and large in general, your transactions are on a public ledger. People can see the transactions that happen. They can see the quantities of the currency that have moved. They can see the addresses to and from, and they can link the entire history of your transactions, effectively having a transparent ledger, as it's intended to do, of your entire history of account movements. Now, this is weird. Like, it's really weird when you think about it, because in the ways in which people use, banks in traditional finance, yes, the bank can see your transactions. Yes, the industry partners like Visa and MasterCard can see your transactions. And to some degree, the companies that you interact with can see at least some of your transactions, or may be able to purchase some slightly anonymous details in which you purchase things, like what you're buying and stuff. But by and large, like, the general public can't see what you're buying. And so it's really weird when you think about it that, like, so many people have become super excited about crypto when most of crypto isn't private. And so one of the things that we're focused on with the way in which we fulfill our mission is to enhance the privacy of other protocols. And we'll dive more into the details of how we're actually fulfilling that, but that's basically the broad spectrum of what we're doing. And so I wanted to take a look back last January. For those who have been here the whole time, this is going to be a little bit of a redundant, session. But for those who are relatively new, or at least want the recap, last January we had a product announcement of Quilibrium Web, which was our secure messenger, and it was a very, very rough launch getting it out there, but ultimately it was a secure messenger that had some relatively similar UI in terms of like how people do group chats to Discord. Now, we've had a lot of learnings along the way. We've had a lot of rework to the UI. We've done a lot to improve it, and it's obviously matured into a much more powerful and expressive application along the way. But at January, we basically had the version 2 of the protocol and a very bare bones explorer, as you can see here, talking about just brass tacks, what's going on the network. And then Quilibrium gave us at least an example of what this network can help do. So that was last January. Let's go ahead and talk about this January. And this is the current state of the entire ecosystem of Quilibrium and what we're doing. So obviously you can see the dashboard got a facelift. Some very major work went into basically rebranding and building out everything for Q-branded assets. But now we're at the point where we're getting 2.1 into a stable state. It has not been an easy process, and I'm actually going to walk through the details of like what all those little pieces are and why that had such a challenge for us. But broad view, a lot has changed in the past year. And I just wanted to walk through all of those things because I think it's very easy for folks to get lost maybe on one topic versus seeing the broader picture. And so, of course, 2.1, it's gone through a number of iterations. Presently, we're working on patch 18 to resolve an issue around synchronization. It's basically trying to solve a problem around how these nodes are getting just the small portions of the network in which they need to cover. As I've mentioned many times in the past, this network is a distributed network that is sharded. And so in the case of how sharded networks work, it's basically taking the network, breaking it up into a bunch of pieces, and then distributing those pieces out individually and having some mathematics to basically balance this out so that we can feel relatively assured that all of the data is appropriately replicated. And then we, of course, have the updated Explorer. It no longer looks bare bones. It has quite a few features that are very useful for people who are running nodes, trying to get more diagnostic information, see where they're at in terms of, where they're sitting as a prover and the overall health of the ecosystem itself. And then, of course, Quilibrium Web. The devs on the team have been doing a tremendous job in improving the feature set of Quilibrium. It's been truly a marvel to watch happen because I've been less involved in Quilibrium Web since its inception last year than it's become today. It's just grown to a very powerful feature set that's comparable to something along the lines of Discord. Obviously, our docs have also gotten a huge facelift. I don't really think we even had much in the way of docs a year ago. Now we actually have documentation on how to build on the protocol, how to run nodes, how to interact, and even also some basic ideas on how the network works, how we handle certain situations that are rather complex in the topic of privacy. It's just much more informative, and it meets a higher bar than we used to meet. Very recently, we launched the Q name service. In fact, it's only been 3 days. And in those 3 days, we already had 11,000 names, more than 11,000 names sold, have reached over 75K in revenue in terms of wrapped quill and USDC combined, and around 700 names have been listed on the marketplace. Some have sold, so the number's a little, it might be off. It might be fewer, might be more at the moment. We also released the first version of Hypersnap, and Hypersnap is, as I said before, our goal is to enhance the privacy of other protocols, and one of the ways we're doing this is through the Farcaster ecosystem. For those who are like very Q-pilled but haven't like ventured out into the broader ecosystem that we've been interacting with, Farcaster was actually how Quilibrium really got its first set of node runners, its first, enthusiasts, the people that were like promoting it far and wide. That started on Farcaster. Regardless of where other people have come in, that was really what kicked things off. And we have a deep degree of respect for the Farcaster ecosystem because it has some of the most, when you think about like getting your first 1,000 users, the early adopter crowd is, it can be a bit of a challenge to find them, but Farcaster is very much like a large social network filled with early adopters, people who are really eager to try new things and are excited about new things. And so we've always like had a very great relationship with the Farcaster ecosystem. And so we've taken this a step forward because Farcaster's kind of had a little bit of an identity crisis as of late. And one of those things is that the network, they've changed their protocol entirely. And the way it was changed basically harmed the decentralization of the protocol. And so we're now running a Snapchain node. They're working on getting it integrated so that we are one of the validators, like main validators of the network. And our particular node runs Hypersnap, which is essentially a way for people who are building clients on Farcaster, building mini apps on Farcaster and Quorum, and building integrations for both as well, to basically be supercharged. They get all of the creature comforts of some of the existing APIs out there like Nanar, but for free on that protocol. And in consequence, they also gain access to the broader Q ecosystem, being able to use Q for file hosting, like if you're posting an image to it, and it will be able to be linked to and referenced on Hypersnap in a way that like just the generic Snapchain client can't. And then of course, Quorum Mobile. Quorum Mobile, as many have already experienced, we're actually the third most popular Farcaster client, is a combination of Quorum Web, which is the generalized decentralized chat client, and also a fully fledged Farcaster client. And we've basically shown the power of that unison through the way in which we handle things like mini apps, handle things like posts. Posts that are on the feed also can be sent in messages on the regular Quorum chats. Farcaster's direct messages are now integrated into the list of direct messages that you have on Quorum, and there's ways in which users can move from Farcaster deeper into the broader Q ecosystem through Quorum Mobile, and that's only going to continue to increase in overall feature set as we move along. And so that brings us to today. So let's talk about what's next. So what's next? We're going to be rolling out the 2.1.0.18 update. It should be happening this week on the earlier side. We have one remaining sync issue, and it's been a very big thorn in our side, but it's coming to a close, and that will essentially get the last mile, so to speak, of the nodes that are just struggling to catch up and participate in the network, to bring them up, get the rest of the network healthy, and complete the shard out process that we need in order to fully unlock the rest of the network's primitives. The next thing thereafter will be the Q Storage public access. Q Storage has been going through its deployment process already. We've gotten the previous testing data, like the folks that have been using our private beta. We're transferring that data over into the format that will work for mainnet. That part of the process has completed, and so we just need to basically flip on a few more switches to bring it online. QKMS, which is our key management service, that will be following up. And then, of course, Q Console, so people can deploy apps with relative ease. Obviously, more features on Quorum and Quorum Mobile. And then QNS will be enhanced with a few more features like auctions and offers. I know a lot of people have been really excited about adding that, and it's kind of amazing that it's only been around for 3 days and it's already had about as many feature requests as Quorum and Quorum Mobile have. So that's been kind of cool. After that, we'll be getting into integrations with other protocols. Actually, kind of before that even too. Like I said, Hypersnap's already out, and we're already getting added to the validator set for Farcaster. But that's going to extend beyond just the Farcaster ecosystem. ZapMe's already talked a little bit about that we're going to be working together to support Quorum and bring some of their web assets onto QStorage. And then beyond all of that, we'll get into other partnerships and co-features as things come out. And so on the topic of partnerships, this has been a long-standing thorn in other people's sides, which is we don't talk about partnerships until both sides are ready. That's just been a principle that we've upheld. And I think now, at the very least, for people who have watched this happen, told us that we should be doing that while looking at other projects that were announcing those partnerships way too early, seeing what's happened to those particular teams, I think hopefully now they understand why we don't announce partnerships until both sides are ready. But in the category of partnerships, the types of products that we're looking for and are working with already is in the context of wallets, privacy-fi, in other words, basically taking regular financial instruments and turning them private, just decentralized finance in general, collectibles and marketplaces around that, gaming, like gaming platforms or just individual games, social media, and general web services. And obviously we will have more announcements on all of those things together, but you'll start to see a lot of very specific SDKs, which if you have the ability to read between the lines, I think you'll start to pick up on the teams that we're working with. And so that basically sums up the entire stack, like what happened over the last year, what we've accomplished, where things are going. And so now I want to talk about things in terms of how we've gotten to where we are and how we continue to build out. And if I had had more time, I would have turned this into a fancy graphic and we would have had like this fun little beautiful tech tree to go through. But frankly, I do too much as it is with a limited amount of time. So we're just going to have to deal with me roughing it through Excalidraw. So as is tradition, I'm going to completely butcher using Excalidraw as a tool. And we're going to talk about how the Q tech tree works. If you are a gamer, then you definitely know what I'm talking about when it comes to a tech tree. If you're not a gamer, then you can think of a tech tree as basically a flowchart that tells you what are the previous steps and skills that are required in order to fulfill whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. In this case, we're not going to be a mage, we're going to be a decentralized protocol that enhances privacy on the web. But the core idea of Q's tech tree breaks down into a couple of different categories. And so we're going to just carve those out into the core trees. And the first would be cryptography. And you can already see I'm going to struggle with Excalidraw. The second one is going to be compatibility. And then the third one is going to be just general protocol. And so these things are important in their own right, but they have a lot of interconnection between one another. So this is going to be kind of a weird tech tree, but it's important to enumerate in this way. So the first is that we have to have solid key management. And the way in which we've been doing key management on the Node software, and now you've seen through our SDKs that we published across the board, we have essentially a few different key management concerns. One is for signing. Well, this is going to be annoying. One is for proofs. And one is for encryption. Oh Lord, that's going to be super annoying. Okay. outside of key management concerns, we've also got MPC related topics. And so for MPC, that would be verifiable encryption, which sounds similar, but it's surprisingly a lot different. We've got oblivious transfer. And we've got, I'll just call them custom, like custom protocols, because we've got a few of them. And then for, oh shoot. Well, that's going to be annoying. Okay. And then for compatibility's sake, it's going to be protocol representations. So that would be things like being able to support things like S3, being able to support things like KMS, and so on. And then finally on the protocol side, we've got the consensus. And we've got P2P comms. All right. So from these things, this is where we've actually gone into deeper topics on how the network operates. For the case of oblivious transfer, we had a compiler primitive. And we also had a streaming connection primitive. And I will get to the next part in a second about this, but this is where things start to link together. And then from the topic of verifiable encryption, we have recovery. For signing, you have essentially your basic, basic key signatures like public key, private key, but we also have a couple of unique signatures that we do for the validators as well. So you have essentially your for lack of a better word, proof of public key. And then we also have aggregation. And these kind of work similarly, but they are important and distinct concepts. For proofs, we have a couple of different proof systems, but the ones that are most relevant for today are going to be Schnorr proofs and KZG proofs. Like I said, this part of the talk is going to get deeply technical, but this is essentially the most critical thing in understanding where things have been and how they're going. And then from here, I guess I'll actually drag this down. This brings us into how really broad stripes This brings us into how the hypergraph on the network itself functions. So things like verifiable encryption and recovery are taking advantage of two different things. They're taking advantage of proofs of data, but they're also taking advantage of KZG proofs in the form of oh god, this is going to be annoying, in the form of creating a polynomial that is both provable mathematically through KZG proofs and also provides data recovery in terms of the distributed content on the network. This is a 2-on-1 thing, but being able to do oblivious or ORAM queries is how we essentially provide private lookups on the hypergraph. Okay, and then from the consensus side, we've got like the raw consensus mechanism itself. And we actually moved from a, I don't know how to really like chart this out, but you can call this basically a detour. We had a homegrown consensus mechanism that it worked fine even under like very intensive testing, but the moment it hit prod and the miracle of people having their own bizarre, custom environments that have like the strangest of combinations, basically no plan survives contact with the enemy. Like it just doesn't. And so we, one of the major like detours we had to take over the last year was kicking out our homegrown consensus and rolling in hot stuff to replace it. From there we had let's see, we'll call this the frame store. Essentially this is the collection and sequencing of events on the network. And this relates ultimately to the hypergraph, because the hypergraph is essentially a collection of proofs about the network, but is also a way to address content on the network. And the frames that are published, both at a global and application shard level, are essentially committing to different tiers of the hypergraph itself. And then from the P2P side, we have libp2p itself, which I've said plenty on that subject. I'm not going to say anymore. And then built on libp2p, but also its own thing, is Blossom Sub, which is our basically our fork of Gossip Sub, if you're familiar with that, but also is a basically a Bloom filtered way of distributing data on the network. And that comes back around to how frames are propagated on the network. And so each of these things, every single one of these lines that have been drawn, is something that came along the way. And I'm actually excluding this part because this all happened in parallel. But each of these things that had lines drawing out are lessons learned and things that had to change and, be improved and be tested and just ground out until we finally got to a point where this is all effectively working together. And we can see that it's actually working together now because the dashboard has gotten to a point where, let me flip that to light mode. Okay, I clicked it too many times. But it's gotten to a point now where the health of the network has dramatically improved. And so we're getting closer and closer to the threshold where the unlock occurs. And you can see that there's still a number of nodes that are on .17 because that's the production release. And then there's also a decent number of peers that are on .18, which is the release that's effectively in testing right now. And once we get to the point that .18 is out, it will have the remainder of the fixes, specifically as they've related to essentially all the content around the frame store and the hypergraph's synchronization mechanism. And that's essentially the tech tree of Q, if you will, strictly for the protocol itself. these things all have their own offshoots as they go into things like Quorum Mobile and Quorum. Let me see. Do I still have that? I don't. That's a different one. Dang. So, but yeah, basically each of these ends up having its own SDK as well. But this is overall the structure of the tech tree we've had to traverse as far as Q goes. But this expands out. It's not just these things and we're done. It's going to be a continual development of new features for the protocol, new offshoots of cryptography, new offshoots for supporting special types of behaviors on the protocol. I guess I didn't even mention this, but like one of the other things that is an offshoot of the protocol is our ability to do onion routing, and that is something that is already available, but that is in its own way its own offshoot. And these are just all the various things that will continue to grow and expand and support new features on the network. But that's basically the tech tree. Now, I normally would have like Twitch feed open and I'd be able to see questions coming through. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to get a little lame here and dig out my cell phone and check other avenues for questions. Yeah, I know. I wish I was able to get this to work on Twitch, but unfortunately, no. Okay, cool. All right. So that brings us now to the last part of today's talk, which is to go through what actually is all available for folks wanting to build today and what they can do if they want to like help hack on the protocol or applications. There's a decent amount of pull requests that we've gotten on the monorepo, which is essentially our, it is a monorepo, but it's a monorepo of the protocol. So essentially anything that gets surfaced as an SDK, typically it's a Rust crate, but we have those here, and then we have a few offshoots that are targeting WebAssembly for when that's crucial, like we have to do something special to make it work on WebAssembly. And then at the protocol side, we've got a bunch of the individual dependencies and packages. Some of them are essentially vendored, so things like the EMP library for oblivious transfer, or the golib P2P library because we've made some decent modifications to it. But then we also have things that are actually just like net native to the protocol itself. So like the hypergraph package, the protobufs package, VDF, etc. If you're wanting to directly dive into the Node software itself and see how that works, that would be under the Node package where you'll have, I would say like the starting point, of course, would be main.go, but like if you're wanting to dive into the actual components, like how it plugs into our consensus mechanism, that would be under the consensus package. And more specifically, if you're wanting to see the difference between app shards and at the global level, then you would be diving into the global and app packages, and that's kind of what you could really call the real core entry points of either the master process when you're running a node would be in global, and the worker processes, which would be the individual workers that are being managed by the master process, and those would be under app. And if you're really like super excited about building intrinsics, if you're from the EVM ecosystem, that would be like a precompile. That would be under the execution intrinsics package, and that's where we have our 4 core intrinsics today. That would be compute, global, hypergraph, and token. Global would be essentially our prover management. Compute is our basically our oblivious transfer based compute, our multi-party compute primitives. Hypergraph would be our data storage and retrieval, and then token would be our privacy preserving token intrinsic. And now we have that as a separate intrinsic from general compute because we're taking advantage of some cryptographic primitives that are a bit faster if we do it this way versus doing things as oblivious transfer all the time. And then if you're wanting to dive into the quorum side of things, we've got Quorum Desktop and Quorum Mobile. And Quorum Mobile is needs to be updated again, but it's been very lively on the issues, and I love to see that. Like, I get really excited about the fact that people are so intensely using the application that they have a billion things to say about what could be improved, and I love that. I absolutely adore the fact that people are that excited about it. So if you have more issues, bring them on. Love that. If you want to add things to the repository, bring it on. Yeah, that's basically it. It's a React Native based application. We do have some native code that's required to provide things like cryptography, which is why we have the modules Quorum Crypto, which is where we actually have the plugins for the native, essentially the Rust interop, like the crates I was talking about in the monorepo, that comes into here. And then Quorum Desktop is not quite pure React, because there is also, like I said, some of those WebAssembly packages get plugged in here too. But it is a very straightforward React application. So if you're familiar with building things in React or React Native, you will be right at home with those two. And I think that actually wraps things up. For those who were going to be here yesterday, there was a bit of an emergency that had me have to reschedule for today. So apologies, I'm a little bit frazzled from that yesterday, but that kind of threw me off. But yeah, that's basically all I had planned. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up. I'll also be looking at Discord, so if any of you are on Discord and had questions as well, happy to answer. Cool. All right, well, in which case, as always, I'm always around on various social channels, at Cassie on Farcaster, Cass_on_Mars on Twitter, or Quilibrium Inc. on Twitter, and obviously on Quorum at Cassie. So I'll be available anywhere. If you have any questions, let me know. And otherwise, I will see you next Sunday, or this upcoming Sunday, for our regular Dev Talks. Cool. All right, everybody.